My name is Ian Carr, and this is my 1995 Acura Integra project car. The beginning of the story, right when COVID was beginning to happen last year, I knew we were going to be in a lockdown for a little bit of time, and I really wanted to have a car that I could, kind of become a project. I wanted something that I could have fun. At the end of it, I'll be able to take it to a couple track days, have a fun time up in the canyons. So I ended up landing on this 95 Integra. I found it right here in Denver, which was really cool. But when it came in, the last owner parked it in his garage. Oh man, I knew I had a lot of work ahead of me. The suspension that was put on it before me, I was able to actually push and bounce the car up and down to the point where the tires were coming off, and the heater core was leaking coolant everywhere. So I knew right away, even if I just wanted to drive it throughout the summer during lockdown, that I just needed to get a couple basic things done to make it safe. I just wanted it to be safe to drive at that point. So went through, I actually took the entire suspension apart, replaced everything. So I have brand new Progress coilovers in there, hard race bushings. If there is a bushing, it's been replaced by hard race. It also has the upper and lower control arms, both front and rear, the hard race or Progress sway bars. So the entire suspension was replaced. So it was really nice because at the end of it, I could actually go out even with the power that it had. I didn't have to worry about going through a corner and being worried. Got through this summer and enjoyed driving it. At one point, I think I blew a coolant line, so decided to replace all the coolant lines in the car. But as winter came around and I was getting used to driving the car, I knew that I wanted to have more power. This car had 142 horsepower stock. That's at the flywheel. And that's also not with Denver altitude. So it's also 25 years old. So who knows how much power it was actually making. So when winter started to roll around, I really wanted to dive in and start building the engine. I knew I wanted to turbocharge it. So started sourcing all the parts and all the goodies for it. And I knew I wanted to make the interior a little more comfortable, a little safer as well if I was going to be doing track days. So I sourced seats. Thank you, Brom. They were able to help out and do a small sponsorship with me for that. So I have Brom SFI or FIA certified seats. Yeah. So the engine that came in this one is the non-VTEC. It's a B18B, which has its own limitations compared to the VTEC engine that came in the GSR or the Type R. But I knew even if I was going to turbocharge it, I still would enjoy the power that it could make. Yeah, so the engine is running on a piggyback system called Honda. Any of the Honda guys will definitely know what that is. But it's a socket that you put into the ECU itself. That was the one thing I did not feel very comfortable doing, so I had the guys up at PFI Speed actually install the board for me, mainly because I knew that I was going to be racing the car, so they were the guys that I wanted to work with. Yeah, so with the actual engine itself, I ended up pulling the engine and I replaced pretty much everything. It has brand new H-beam connecting rods from Scat. It has Nippon Racing cast pistons, which are 9.5-1 compression, so I lowered the compression on it. Yes, I wanted the engine to just be a little safer with a slightly lower compression. I also replaced all the hardware inside of the engine, so the connecting rod bolts, the head studs with ARP bolts. The cylinder head itself has new valves in it from Supertech, as well as dual valve springs from Supertech with titanium retainers. It has Brian Crowder Stage 2 turbo camshafts in there as well. I really wanted to make sure that since I wasn't putting a VTEC cylinder head in there or a VTEC engine, that I wanted this cylinder head to flow as best as possible. So the blessing and the curse of the Honda and Acura community is that all of the knowledge is there in the old forums, especially from like the early 2000s. It's important to make sure if you're ever going to build a car that you know who your tuner is ahead of time. So while I was finding out all of this information and spending a lot of time figuring out exactly what parts to buy, I was also confirming what to do with my with the tuner themselves. Yeah, so knowing that the B18 engine is only a 1.8 liter, I didn't want to throw the biggest turbo on it possible. I wanted the car to be enjoyable to drive around on the street, but to also have the power capability. So I ended up going with a Precision 5831 turbo. It is an entry-level turbo, capable, keyword capable, up to 580 horsepower. I was not planning ever on making that much horsepower, but and just grabbing a turbo that I knew I could grow into would be really helpful. I also worked with a fabricator. The company is called Go Auto Works. They did the exhaust manifold, the downpipe, they supplied the turbo, the wastegate, the blow-off valve, all the intercooler piping, the intercooler itself, and all the lines and hardware that needs to go with it. So it was a really, really useful and well-built kit, which I think is important. They did, so I worked with PFI as well to actually tune the vehicle. Yeah, the transmission was a first for me. I've owned over 20 vehicles, including some motorcycles. I've worked on every single one of them. I've never had to pull apart and rebuild the transmission. So if there was ever a car to learn it on, a 90s Honda is the way to go. So I watched many videos, read as many books as I could about it, but I wanted to put in a limited slip. If you were going to be increasing the horsepower on one of these cars, you need to have a limited slip in there. And I wanted to replace a lot of the bearings inside on the main input shaft as well. So I was able to pull it apart. I worked with M Factory, again, another person who was willing enough to sponsor me. I was really happy to get the M Factory limited slip differential. We actually upgraded some of the internal components as well to really help with traction, especially since I knew I was going to be racing it. So I was able to get the whole transmission taken apart, new parts installed, and back in the car without messing it up. Yeah, the interior of the car I really enjoyed doing. It was one of the few areas I was more focused on how did it look versus how does it perform. So I've been in Sparcos, I've been in a lot of the racing seats that are fixed back, and I am a larger man and I was not very comfortable in most of them. So I actually was able to test a Brom seat and ended up putting in the order that day after reaching out to the team there. So it has Brom seats with planted brackets to keep it secure on the ground. I re-dyed the entire carpet on the inside. There's no more rear seats. And also had like a tan headliner and A-pillars, C-pillars. So I ended up wrapping all of those in a faux suede just to kind of keep the interior of the cabin a little darker. There's also in the back of the car some chassis bracing. It's a strut tower brace that does a whole X brace. Helps kind of secure the rear C-pillars as well. And so PLM is the company that I bought that from. I wanted to increase the horsepower of the car, but power and weight is always a big key factor with some of these older Hondas. So what I ended up doing to reduce some weight, I removed the seats and a lot of the insulation and padding that went with those. Spare tires been gone. But the big weight savings actually came up front. I went to a half-size radiator, so the radiator itself is much smaller. It does not have power steering anymore, or any of the components that went with that. It does not have air conditioning anymore, or any of the components that went with that. It also doesn't have a heater core. So this vehicle will be very cold in the winter and very hot in the summer. But all of that has definitely reduced the vehicle about 250 pounds, which is a big weight savings for a car this size. So let me tell you a little bit about a 1995 Acura Integra interior for 215,000 miles when you have solid engine mounts. It is nothing but rattles and thuds and clunks and this thing falling down and everything you would ever expect from a 1995 Acura Integra. It does, however, allow you to feel very connected to the vehicle because this thing doesn't have power steering, so when we're going slow, you're getting a little arm workout. ABS. So when you're pressing down on that brake pedal, you are feeling what the brakes are doing, and if you're going to the limit, you're gonna know. The gauges are all old and analog, but man, this thing is just enjoyable to drive. Mountains over there. That's where we're going today. It's gonna be a good time. Definitely. So I spent the better part of 2 months, mainly on the weekends and some nights, working on the engine, getting it back together. It was a really incredible experience to actually go down to like the last bolt. But I did replace everything, and everything got back together. Yeah, and big shout out to my neighbor Dwight. Dwight came over and helped actually pull the engine, and loaned me some tools as well. So. Anyway, so after a couple of months of working on the engine, I was able to get it back in, started up first try, which was really incredible. And so I scheduled my dyno day up with PFI Speed. And so we went up there. I had trailered the car after putting a couple hundred braking miles on it. But after I got it up there, we got it on the rollers. We did a once over with Brent and Jamie, who run/own the shop. And everything looked good to go. So. First run, we got it up and going at about 6 psi, and we had 263 wheel horsepower. And my horsepower goals was only, if I broke 300 at the wheels, I would be incredibly happy. I wanted to build the engine to have the capacity to make 350 wheel horsepower. So if I hit 350, that was my goal. Over 300 is what I only wanted. So we did another pull at 8 psi and made about 280 horsepower at the wheels, and then we kicked it up to 10 psi, and we broke that 300 mark. We made about 302 horsepower at the wheels at 10 psi. So we hit 10 psi and we broke 300 wheel horsepower. So I looked at my tuner and I said, "Hey, are we there? How much more do we got?" And he just kind of looked at me and gave me a little head nod, and he made a couple of minor adjustments. And so we went finally for our final pull on the dyno, and we made 333 high revving buff horsepowers, and I couldn't be happier. It was right at my goal. And I do have to just kind of call out as well, it was 95 degrees that day, and the shop was probably over 100. So I would love to go back and see if we could hit that 350 mark in the fall when the temperatures finally drop. So the maximum, I made 333 wheel horsepower at 12.5 psi. So that is a street tune. So that is what I drive around on the street on pump gas. On top of that, there is no E85 or race fuel in there. It has 91 octane and it makes that much power, and it's just a total blast to drive. So when we did the tuning, one of the really awesome features of Honda is that you have what's called boost by gear. And boost by gear literally limits the amount of boost or horsepower that you make in the first and second gears where you would normally have tire spin. So in first and second gear, I'm making probably about 280 wheel horsepower. It's at about 8 psi of boost. And then once you get into third, fourth, and fifth gear, that's when it'll go up to 12.5 psi. So it maximizes traction from stop. So any future plans that I have with this car, I want to get it to the track. I want to go enjoy it and have fun driving it. Safety is a really big, important factor for me. So the seats that I have are FIA certified, but I really want to get either a half of a roll cage, so the seats back, or a full roll cage into the car before I really start going out and doing 8-track days. The brakes have been updated, so everything on them has been replaced with brand new or better components, but even just today driving around in the canyons a little bit, I did feel a little bit of brake fade, so I think there's a brake upgrade in my not too distant future as well. So to drive this car, simply put, I would not daily drive it. It has solid engine mounts in it. It has a 6-puck racing clutch in it. So driving around on the streets is fun, but a little tedious. It also doesn't have power steering or air conditioning. So you are getting into this car to go out and drive it for what it is. You are not getting in this to go get groceries or anything like that. So today was nothing but a blast. We found some really fun curvy roads that you can really sink in and throw it into, and really let the turbo spool on some of those straights as well. Right before I had to reschedule my first dyno day, unfortunately. I was getting ready to go. It was literally 2 days beforehand. I went out for one last little drive around the block, and I came home and I was looking at the engine. I just noticed a drip of oil right by the head gasket in the front, and my shoulders sunk. It's just one of those feelings that you can't believe that it's leaking oil. At that time, I thought I was leaking oil from the head gasket itself, which would have been a very big issue. So I had to postpone my dyno day, and I started doing some inspecting and actually realized that I had installed the camshaft seals improperly. Sometimes it happens, and luckily it was a cheap and easy fix. But it was a blessing in disguise, because what I ended up doing was taking that time to upgrade the timing belt to a Kevlar reinforced Gates Racing timing belt, just as a little extra layer of insurance. So now it doesn't leak oil, and the timing belt is borderline indestructible. I can go through my top 3 favorite things that I enjoyed doing on this while in the build, and the top 3 things that I learned, aka messed up really bad. The first one was just pulling the engine. It was really enjoyable to get the engine out and on a stand. Anyone who has the capacity or wants to learn what your car is like, I would definitely recommend it, because you can be like, oh, this line goes here because it does this, or hey, oh, that's how the oil pump works. This is where it picks it up. That all makes sense. So just getting it out of the car and onto a stand, number 1 favorite moment. Number 2 was actually checking the spec of everything. So when I replaced the pistons and when I replaced all the bearings as well, you need to make sure that everything is within the factory spec. Otherwise, you need to send it out to a machine shop. So actually getting the tools, the specialized tools to do that, to make sure that everything is just precise. And when I say precise, I'm talking to the micromillimeter for bearing tolerances. And so spending time really focusing on that and making sure it was just perfect, incredibly enjoyable. And then the third one I wanted to say was actually making horsepower on the dyno, but it was that first start. Anyone who has built an engine before, you know how much it stinks to go to start up the car for the first time, and it just either doesn't turn over, you don't hear the fuel pump prime. So without a hiccup, it started the first time. All right, here we go. First attempt at starting. Literally shaking, and hopefully nothing breaks. Some of the things I learned. Transmissions are really difficult, especially if you've never worked on them before. Things slide, things lock, things move. And so I unfortunately had a bearing come apart while I was working on the transmission. So I had to go out and buy a new $80 Honda bearing to go back into the transmission. They're also very, very precise. When they are going back together, you need to make sure you're not tilted or crooked. Everything has to slide back together just ever so exactly. The clutch was another one. I wasn't sure how much horsepower I wanted to make at the beginning of this. Had I known that I wanted to make upwards of 300 wheel horsepower, I probably would have gone with a slightly stronger clutch. I am not worried about this one, but the longevity I am a little bit. And then lastly, I'm really kicking myself in the butt for not keeping the air conditioning in there, because on a day like today where you're out for 3 or 4 hours driving around, air conditioning would have been really nice. Me personally, I moved out to Colorado in 2019, not too long before the COVID pandemic really settled in. But where I came from, back on the East Coast, I had a really great car community, and it's always meant everything for me. So I knew when I moved out here that I saw how popular like the Colorado Cars and Coffee community is, like the events that happen hosted by Adams. It's really great to see that. So I was able to go to one event before the lockdown started to happen, and I met a bunch of people. I met some of the staff here at Colorado Cars and Coffee, and it really just built a sense of community immediately. And it was really helpful for those, those long months that we were all kind of trapped inside, knowing that there was a shared feeling around it, as well as a shared passion around the cars and everything that we're all doing to them. So this car has 215,000 miles on it. And while everything else has been totally restored, the body of it is about 15 different shades of white. When I bought it, some previous owners somewhere along the line had put a bunch of the little JDM goodies on there, and so the fenders that you see on the wall have holes, and they were not rubbed, or they're not rolled properly, so they're a little baconated. And anyway, so the front half of the car has been replaced and repainted, not due to an accident, but just because I wanted it to look a little nicer. But if you all in the community would be interested in doing a crowdsourced vinyl wrap on this thing for Cars and Coffee, I think we could make that happen. Let us know what you think. Put it in the comments.